Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event, Unleashing Individuality, the leadership skill that unlocks all others. We'd like to give a special thanks to the University of Lynchburg College of Business and Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance for sponsoring the event and book. Now, let's welcome to the stage tonight's host, Nancy Hubbard. Nancy is the Dean of the University of Lynchburg College of Business and Professor of Management.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to see such a great crowd here this evening. And we are so excited to have Glenn Llopis with us tonight. I'll give you a little bit of background on Glenn, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story of how we met, and there's a reason for telling you this story. First of all, Glenn is one of the leading experts in the United States on leadership. And he focuses on leadership and personalized approach, especially with customers. He runs the GLLG Consulting Group. He's had an incredible career in industry. He works with Fortune 500 companies on leadership and team building. He's written 4 books. This is his 5th book, New York Times best-selling books. And he is listed by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 speakers on leadership. He's also a major contributor to Forbes and Harvard Business Review. So I've known Glenn for less than 2 years. And we met really through serendipity. And that was, we connected on LinkedIn. He sent me a leadership, a thought leadership piece, and I read it and I thought, holy smokes, this guy gets it. And so we started a correspondence, and then we had a Zoom call, and then we had another one, and then he writes an article in Forbes where he quotes me, and then I'm speaking at his conferences, and all the time we're exchanging ideas. And I found the more I talked to Glenn, the more I learned. And the more I talked to Glenn and the people he surrounds himself with, I learned from them as well. And there's a reason for telling you this, is serendipity. Don't discount serendipity. Don't discount that person you're sitting next to on a plane or a train. Start up a conversation. You just never know who you will meet. But also, you need to work at serendipity. It doesn't just land in your lap. You've really got to make an effort to do it. So when I'm in the morning, first thing I do when I get up, I get on LinkedIn for 15 minutes. I see who's written what's the interesting and the latest on thought leadership that I can learn from. And then I will often reach out to those people and connect with them and say, hey, I really liked this piece that you wrote. And it is amazing how many people will reciprocate. And especially if you're younger and you're just starting out, there are a lot of people in our industry that we don't, we don't do this for money. We do this because we love being with students and we love helping you and mentoring you. So the idea is reach out, use mentors, put people in your lives who help you be a better person. And so I will absolutely say, I can't believe I have only known Glenn for 2 years, but he has had such an amazing impact on the way I think. So I hope that you find you have the same experience when hearing to what he has to say. Glenn, come on up. The clicker is yours.
And then there's another one. Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. My goodness, it's so nice to be with you guys tonight. I'll tell you, Dean Hubbard is very special. When I first met her, I couldn't believe just how quick she was with her thinking, with her points of view, and I knew that she was a winner when I first met her. And earlier today, I had an opportunity to have lunch with a group of students, some of you who are here this evening. Is that Miles? And it was so great to see just how much she cares and the level of trust and relationship that there is. And it just gave me hope to know that these are the kind of people, the leaders that we need to build a better tomorrow. You know, my last name has won me so many bets. You'd be amazed at the number of people who don't know how to pronounce my last name. So here it goes. Yo, peace! You love that? Yo, peace! And why am I making an example of this? Because if you have a friend, or maybe yourself, you have a name that's difficult to pronounce, make sure that others get it right. See, that's why my phonetic pronunciation will follow me wherever I go. for the rest of my life. See, our name is a big part of our legacy. You see, unleashing individuality is a skill. In fact, I believe it's the single most important skill we could all learn. You see, it's about knowing when you see suppression while it's happening and then root it out by interrupting it and then pivoting from suppressing to unleashing. So I'd like to start tonight by giving you a glimpse of what's at stake with these powerful words from Kayla Reddick. Our first speaker, Kayla Reddick, is the founder of the Invincible movement. After experiencing the isolation and uniqueness of being a young adult cancer patient, she grew determined to change the experience for fellow patients and survivors. Kayla will share her story of being suppressed as an individual by the many doctors that evaluated her breast cancer diagnosis at the age of 24. What did that feel like?
It was really destabilizing, and honestly, it just added to the isolation that I was already feeling. You see, when you're diagnosed with cancer at 24, you no longer fit in with your normal peer group. And good luck trying to date when you're bald and you don't have breasts anymore. I mean, it just throws you for a complete loop. And then you don't fit in on the outside, and then you go on the inside, the hospital, the space where you're supposed to be welcome. And I was lumped in with everyone who was had the same diagnosis as me, and we were on the same treatment schedule, which means that I was lumped in with 50 and 60-year-old women because that's the type of cancer I had.
So you were lumped into a category.
Absolutely. And so not only did I not fit in on the outside, now I don't belong here inside anymore, and that isolation is insidious.
What a story. See, Kayla did what most people wouldn't do. Rather than suppress her truth, she revealed it. It's shocking to me just how much we suppress other people's individuality. And this begins at school, when you're told that you have one right answer, or you have to choose a major, or you have to follow a predetermined path. And then it extends into work, when you have to meet rigid guidelines in how you get hired and how you move up the ladder. And then, as Kayla was so courageous in sharing with us, it even extends to how you're seen and treated when you're fighting for your life. See, as a young boy, I had an older brother, and I looked up to him. But I came to learn later on in life that we were two completely different people. We had strong opinions about what would make me worthy for his respect. He would tell me, you have to get an MBA, you have to go to a big school, you have to get a corporate job. And guess what? He did those things and did extraordinarily well. He went up the ranks at some of the top name global corporations in the world. In fact, his advice works very well for many. In fact, I pursued those goals too. But my work in school and my accomplishments in work in school were a bit of a different sort. You see, I struggled with tests. I was on academic probation for a bit, and then I figured it out and graduated with a B average from UCLA. Then I took those GMATs. I studied so hard. But my scores were underwhelming. But see, I figured it out. And I kept working hard until I realized, wait a second, I could excel at things that went beyond tests and grades. I mean, I led and was involved in many academic councils and leadership groups. In fact, my senior year in college, I was, at the time, the only political science major to get accepted to be a peer health counselor, someone who didn't have a major in biology or kinesiology. In fact, I was named one of the 20 students from my graduating class as a senior spotlight for my leadership in work in crisis prevention. Now, after I graduated, I was able to get that corporate job in the food and beverage industry, and I became an executive by the age of 25. But my entrepreneurial nature, it just didn't fit into those standardized work environments. And so, what did I do? I started my own food business, which I sold for a profit. And for over the past 15 years, I've been working with Fortune 500 corporate leaders. What's the point here? See, I still felt like a bit of an outsider. Why? Because I didn't meet those standards that my brother pushed hard at me. I didn't meet them. And for the past several years, I've been working with leaders to help them break free from the traps of standardization. Because see, standardization has a way of sucking you in, getting you to try to meet other people's standards rather than your own. So, here's a question for you. In fact, I'm curious. How many of you have been suppressed to comply to other people's standards? Whether at home, whether at work, whether at school. And how did it make you feel? How did it make you feel? I want you to hold on to that, and then when we're done, share with me how it made you feel, so I can help remind you that you actually have more influence than you think you do. You see, this journey over the past several years has been very personal for me, as it's helped me evolve my own understanding of just how much our lives are ruled by standards that we had no voice in creating, and oftentimes feel as if we don't have the ability to challenge them. But this is a great quote that puts it in perspective. And this comes from Donna Hicks. Now, Donna is an expert at human dignity and a specialist at conflict resolution. And she described one major obstacle in our human relationships. And it went away. But okay, we'll recapture it. Oops, I think we've lost all the slides at this point. Our failure to recognize how vulnerable human beings are to be treated as if they didn't matter. You see, Kayla felt like she didn't matter. I felt like I didn't matter. And all of you feel like you don't matter when your individuality is suppressed. So, we need to start embracing these 5 realities, these 5 truths about who we are and what we stand for. Number 1 is, we have value. We want to be included. I mean, we are worthy. We want to be seen in our full humanity. We are unique, and we want to be ourselves. We have experience and insight, and we want to do more. And finally, we have ideas. We want to explore our possibilities. Does this resonate with you? You see, it's painful. It's painful to think just how much we hold ourselves and others back, but it's certainly freeing to see the power that we have, the influence that we have to free ourselves and each other. So my friend Jeff Blue was in law school when he found out that he could actually make a living, make money, listening to music. And he heard about this job called an A&R rep, which stands for Artist and Repertoire. It's those people that get to listen to music demos, go see bands. They get to scout and nurture musical talent, and then they bring that talent into a record label. And as Jeff told me over a cup of coffee one day, he said, Glenn, when I heard people talking about A&R, my pulse quickened, my vision was so much more vibrant. I knew that this was for me. He had those moments, we've all had them, right? When you just know. But what he also knew is that there was one linear path to become an A&R rep. You had to be someone's assistant. And so while he was in law school, he got an internship at MCA Records. And he started asking all the executives if he can be their assistant. They all said no. Why? Well, he's going to law school. He's a lawyer. He has no creativity. They told him, you're the kind of person that will want to take my job. But this is what he also said to himself. I intrinsically knew that I had the qualities to be an A&R person. But I didn't have them on paper. I didn't have the connections. I didn't have the network and the experience, but I knew I had the talent and the drive. He had the talent and the drive. You see, haven't you ever felt that you know that you were meant to do something specific in your life? Did you ever feel that you were meant to follow a certain career path, but it was such a narrow way to get there and you didn't meet the standards and you said, well, I'll go to plan B, and then C, and then D. In many respects, I can say I'm grateful that my scores were underwhelming on those GMATs, because if I would have followed that path, would I be on this stage today? I can tell you that I would have. Because see, I had someone in my life, my father, that took the time to get to know me as an individual and knew that I would be on this stage tonight. Because he didn't raise me to be him. He raised me to be me. So, you see, Jeff's experiences and story it's truly incredible. But I don't go into all the details now. I do in my book, Unleashing Individuality, but here's what happened. You already got a glimpse of it. You see, he fought suppression until he became a well-known and successful music journalist. He continued to fight suppression to convert his journalistic success into what? Into his first A&R job, and then he fought even more suppression to convince people that he knew how to spot great talent. In fact, some of his first artists, as you can see them, were who? They were Limp Bizkit, Macy Gray, and he even discovered Linkin Park. Now, some would now say that Jeff has the right resume. He's a multi-platinum A&R executive whose acts have sold over 100 million albums. But see, this is not about an individual who bucked the system. See, this story is about how do we modernize the system to make it work for every individual? How do we make it work for every individual? How do we make it work? See, what I've learned is this. It's best to understand this by doing a reverse engineering of one story. So let's do this with Jeff, shall we? See, the people in charge didn't let him in. They saw him as very limiting. They saw him limiting because he wasn't creative, supposedly, and he was out to get their job. But what else? He was part of a group, lawyers, and they had strong opinions about members of that group. See, the people in that industry also, they limited him to who he can be. What else did they do? Well, Jeff knew that there was that narrow path to become an A&R rep, become an assistant. But see, that standard was created well before Jeff knew what even A&R was. So those standards actually controlled what Jeff can do and how he can get to where he wanted to go. See, these are the 5 indicators of individuality. And Jeff lived through all of them and fought a lot of suppression. But see, these indicators, they span across a spectrum of who you let in, how you see them, who you let them be, what you let them do, and how you let them do it. See, these are the indicators that break down individuality into their component parts. In fact, this is how we can measure them. So here's a question. Have any of you ever been taught anything about measuring individuality? Have you ever been taught how to measure inclusion? No. See, because the systems weren't designed to measure difference. The system was designed to measure sameness. So, what do? How do we break free from this? You see, Jeff, he had experiences that many of us have in the worlds of business and academia and healthcare and all sectors. But what he learned is that when you move up the ladder, there's already a predetermined path. And those that try to go up that ladder on their own terms will be met with a lot of resistance. See, sometimes suppression is deliberate, but oftentimes it's not. It's just that we have decided to make it easy for the institutions that serve us by just accepting those standards and just adapting to those standards rather than questioning them or even preparing ourselves to challenge them. So here's Guillermo. Guillermo is my firm's 28-year-old director of marketing and strategy. Now this young man challenges me every single day to see my own suppression in action. You see, he's helped me reshape my thinking. He's unleashed my individuality to a level I never thought imaginable. And today, we unleash each other's. Oh, by the way, he does it from Brazil. And not just in one location. He's constantly traveling. He's constantly surfing. And yet, he gets the job done. And he amazes me with his incredible creativity and pioneering thinking. But if I were to insist that Guillermo work on site in one location, if I were to insist that he operate like I do, guess what? He wouldn't. And that would be my loss. You see, Guillermo's lifestyle-driven career, as I like to call it, truly reminds me of this powerful and inspiring observation by Hungarian-American psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And here's what it states. The best moments in our lives are not passive, receptive, and relaxing times. See, the best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. So how about if we break this down for a moment? Let's break it down. See, to be stretched to your limits, well, that means that we must be trusted to try something that we've never tried before. It means that we can't be held back or excluded by lack of experience or lack of proof that you can do it. See, we all want to have some say in the matter. We want to have some influence about what we do and how we do it. See, but that requires us to have the space and the safety to be who we are, ask what we want, share what matters to us, and speak up and trust that someone will listen. You see, we want to do more. We want to explore our possibility. And we don't mind working hard for it. But we also want to believe in the work that we do. We want to believe that our individual contribution can make a difference. That our individual contribution can make a difference. Let's go back to these 5 indicators for a moment. See, when you see individuality through these indicators, you'll start to see them everywhere, within challenges or conflicts. this is when you'll begin to see suppression in action and find ways to interrupt it. See, at a very high level, unleashing individuality requires a concerted effort to know and account for the realities and values of individuals. And while it's great to honor the individuality of one person, how do we do this for a dozen of our classmates, teammates, professors, colleagues, or maybe even hundreds or thousands of them? Well, we need to embrace a process that can convert into a habit. Into a habit. You see, we have these 5 indicators, right? What we need to learn how to do is utilize them to assess how we're doing things and whether or not we might be the ones suppressing individuality without even knowing it, and then interrupt them and then pivot. Because see, to assess, what do you need? To assess, you really need to know whether you're unleashing individuality or not, or if you're just unknowingly suppressing people. Well, how do you do that? By investigating and by listening. Well, to interrupt, you need to stop the habits and the systems that suppress people. And then, of course, you need to pivot. You need to pivot by identifying those actions that will drive real change. Change that's transformational, not merely incremental. Not merely incremental. So how do we break free from the standards of the past? Start asking the people that you learn, that you lead or that you serve. What do you think? How do you want to work? What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? You don't have to have all the answers anymore. We need to give people the space to feel safe, that they can share what they're thinking and what they're feeling. Now, in this upcoming video, this is Kristen Gwinner. And Kristen is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Chico's, FAS, women's clothing stores. And Kristen gives us a sense of how you can start assessing within a large corporate setting. Now, she'll be talking a bit about how to elevate one's capacity in a hybrid environment, but these lessons can apply to any decision or challenge. Have a look. So, Kristen, tell me about your thoughts around leadership readiness for hybrid.
I think as we consider hybrid, it's quite complex in some organizations where it's not just remote or on-site, but there's a myriad of flexibility within that and how flexible can you be with each role. The readiness for leaders, I think it's on the spectrum.
So Kristen, let's talk about activating capacity. Why shouldn't it be limited by our work environment?
Well, I think work environment is one piece, right? But one of the things that I was really trying to look at is when you look across the organization, all of the roles within the organization, you're really getting to the people. And so one of the things that I found valuable was looking across the entire life cycle of work and seeing what all the interdependencies are, and then looking at each role and then determining, can it stay remote? Does it need to be on site? Or could it be flexible? And can we really work through that? And so one of the things that I found valuable in activating capacity is talking with each leader about how it could be, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what's your opinion on that? And then each associate, what's their preference? Have they enjoyed working out of their home office? Is there anything that they need from that? Would they like the flexibility to come and go as they want from their home office or work office? And how do their interconnectedness across the organization, can we figure that out together?
See, sometimes it just takes small pivots to make a big difference. But oftentimes, suppression shows up in standards that are so entrenched, it takes a massive movement to drive change. Now I want to go back to healthcare for a moment. And I'd like to share another quick video from Dr. Jack Cox. Now, Jack, he's a dear friend. What an incredible human being. And Jack helps us understand why Kayla felt so suppressed. But what he also does is to help us understand that the healthcare system continues, especially on the provider side, has challenges in serving patients that don't fit into their boxes. Have a look. So, sorry guys.
What's missing is what I call the relevance factor. And that is, are the outcomes that we're seeking relevant to the individual at their particular point in life? Healthcare is in the middle of a transformation right now. But I think that with that transformation and the disruption that we're seeing with this current pandemic, which I think is actually accelerating innovation, and I think that some of the disruption and innovation that we're seeing in healthcare today is moving us more toward a more personalized, relevant value equation. One of the biggest challenges that we have in healthcare is the way that we're reimbursed. We're actually reimbursed for sick care and procedures rather than health and wellness, which is what most individuals want. Unfortunately, we don't have good systems for asking individuals right now. Instead of simply asking the question to the patients, the individuals receiving care, what matters to you? What matters to you? What's important to you? So we end up delivering a lot of care based on our models of quality and value instead of focusing on what's important to patients.
Are we beginning to see the pattern? See, one thing Jack made clear is that healthcare needs a major pivot, especially if healthcare providers are going to truly be patient-centered. But did you hear something else that he said? It's based on incentives. How are we being incentivized to care for the individual? Or what are we really solving for here? So how do we begin to unleash individuality? How do we do that? Well, first, it's important that we understand the common obstacles that stand in the way. The common obstacles that stand in our way. Why? Because if we know what those are, then that makes us better prepared to assess how we're doing, interrupt them, and pivot. You guys got the wheel now? You got to assess, interrupt, and pivot. And whose responsibility is that? Each of yours. Don't wait for somebody else to do that for you. That's your tool. So when you see it happening, act. Don't wait. Because then when you wonder why you're getting the short end of the stick, you could hold yourself accountable for that. And by the way, this is not about them versus us. This is about all of us. We need each other. The systems need our inputs, and we need the systems. This is not about not having standards. It's critical to have standards. But do we have the right standards in place at such an unprecedented time in modern history? Which then takes me to sharing with you what those two major obstacles are. So I took the 5 indicators, and now I'm going to show you the 2 major obstacles that stand in the way and that drive us to suppress people. So number 1, you don't let outsiders in, nor do you let in those people who have contrary voices. Sound familiar? What else? We see people in narrowly defined ways. We make assumptions based on group identity. It gets tougher. What else? We don't update how we see someone as they evolve. And we want people to assimilate. Let me make sure I make this one clear. Let's say that someone hasn't seen you over the past 10 years. They're going to know you what you were like 10 years ago, not today. Why? Because that's how we are. We take snapshots of people. And then we expect that social media and LinkedIn is going to tell the real story. No, we need to get to know each other as individuals. And that's not just their responsibility, it's yours too. How about this one? We leave no room to explore possibilities. We set their course for them. And then finally, how do you let them do it? We hold people to outdated standards and we dictate how they do things. Here's the reality, ladies and gentlemen. We suppress individuality, and we don't even know it. You are suppressing people every day, and you don't even know it. We have felt suppressed for years. Why? Because we have seen that it's not safe to be and share ourselves. That's simple. And in a world where new technologies are making products and services obsolete before we know what's coming, see, we can't afford to have workplaces filled with people whose individuality is stifled. Can't afford to have that. Now, don't just take my word for this. I'd like for you to listen to the powerful words of Robert Johnson, president of Western New England University. Robert, let's jump into this. I know that you have such a compelling opinion about evolution of leadership and organizational agility. Can you share that with us?
We're now leading in a world of ambiguity. And from a higher education perspective, we're educating young people for jobs that do not exist, to solve problems yet to be identified, utilizing technology that is yet to be created. Once upon a time in a world far, far away, you could predict the future in your organizations because of standardization, and everything, 80% was predictable. What have we learned in COVID? We've had to adapt, we've had to be nimble, we've had to be collaborators, we've had to be divergent thinkers, and I think for leaders going forward, you've heard the word authenticity, be an authentic leader. I think it has to start there. And if anyone thinks that we're going to go back to the old way of doing it within higher education and in most industries, in this new world, they're sorely, sorely wrong. So we have this crucible as leaders to create what the next new normal is going to look like. And it centers around personalization.
What's his message?
We're not going back.
We're not going back. What else is his message? Yes?
Be flexible, be willing to learn new things and implement those strategies in a timely and efficient manner.
Excellent. And that requires what on our behalf? We need to unleash ourselves. Don't wait for permission. Nobody has all the answers, ladies and gentlemen. We're all figuring this out together. What else? What else did you pick up from Robert's message? Yes, in the back.
Be willing to adapt to change.
Pardon me?
Be willing to adapt to change.
Be willing to adapt to changes. How can we accomplish that? By adapting the systems that invite people in, rather than inviting them out. Anybody else? Let's have a little course here. Yes, in the corner.
Personalization, the way we go about what we do in the future is all about us, ourselves, and individualism.
Bingo. I'm sorry, keep going.
In how we move forward, it's all dependent on each individual worker and what they bring to the table.
So let me share what you so eloquently said, that we are in the middle of a period of time where the forces of standardization and personalization are operating at the extremes, and we need them to have the proper balance. What does that mean? In standardization, the institution defines the individual. In personalization, the individual defines the process towards the mission. And right now we're experiencing standardization at the extremes and personalization at the extremes. Anybody want to know why? Come on, tell me why. There's a smart group here. Why are they at the extremes right now? Because they haven't... I'm sorry?
We're figuring it out. We don't know it yet.
Aha!
Put together. Act down.
Okay, and why are we having trouble figuring it out? Because standardization got the best of us, and we have trouble being independent thinkers. In other words, why do you think we all cling to a certain group? Because that gives us comfort. But what's happening is that the individual is gaining power. Ask corporate America. You've heard of the Great Resignation? workers leaving the organization. Why is this happening? Because it's not just about who their leader is now, it's they're losing trust in who their employer is. So we've given people ways to step out, but how do we give people ways to step in again? And this is crucial for our economy. This is no joke. So we have to find the right balance between standardization and personalization. So what happens now that we've gotten there? What are the consequences if we don't create the space or place for people to unleash their individuality? What do you think happens? Well, number one, we will continue to inadvertently put people in position to operate and contribute far below their capacity. And number two, we will continue to fail to see and support each other's dignity. Each other's dignity. I mean, do you, as students, is your student experience purposeful and thrilling right now? Thanks for being so honest. No. But there's no one to blame here. And I'll explain this in a moment. You see, most people will admit that the purpose and thrill disappears when their ideas get shot down because we just don't do it that way. See, but we can regain that. We can regain that purpose and thrill if we unleash our individuality. So, how are we going to do that? Well, let me show you a few things. Number one, if we suppress by not letting outsiders in, then we must unleash with inclusive working and thinking. What a novel concept. If we're going to suppress by seeing people in narrowly defined ways, we're going to unleash by seeing them beyond just their role and responsibility. If we suppress by not updating how we see people, then we must unleash by letting them be someone who evolves. And if we suppress by leaving no room to explore, we must unleash by letting people become free. And if we unleash by holding people to old, outdated standards, we need to unleash by letting them be immune to the standards of the past. See, when we activate, elevate, realize, and exceed our full capacity and contribute at our highest levels, man, that's when it becomes thrilling. Right here on this stage, I feel thrilled that I decided to have a career that was hard so that the day would come where I can help you. That makes me feel thrilling. And that's what happens when you can bring that thrill to work or to school, because then it feels purposeful, for goodness sakes. We have a lot of work to do, don't we? But we can get it done. And this is how we're going to do it. Number one, you matter. And it took me a while to realize that I do. So let me save you the grief and anxiety. You matter. Why do you matter? Because your talent, your difference, your perspectives, we can all learn from them. So don't ever forget that. You matter. Because you know what I've seen too many times is that we fail to see and support each other's dignity in our workplaces, in our schools, and in doctors' offices. In fact, you might be wondering, well, what are you talking about here, Glenn? Well, don't we want to treat each other as human beings? You say, well, of course we do. I treat people like human beings. I'm not disrespectful. Well, I've learned that in those workplaces, in schools, and in doctors' offices, You were never meant to be treated with disrespect. See, I've learned that suppressing individuality happens unconsciously. Why? Because we've just been wired to operate a certain way, that we have forgotten the role that the individual plays in our own evolution as a society, in the workplace, schools. It's time to change that. It's time to restore our dignity. So how do we restore our dignity? Well, when you suppress contrary voices, we must unleash with investigative listening. If we suppress by making assumptions on group identity, we must unleash by seeing people beyond their groups as a whole person. If we unleash by wanting people to assimilate, we need to let people be and share themselves. If we suppress by setting someone's course for them, we must unleash by giving them the freedom to stray. If we suppress by dictating how people do things, we must unleash by trusting them to do things their own way. Unleashing individuality is the single most important skill you can know. You now know what that means? Who has that responsibility? Each and every one of us. Oh, beyond all the other responsibilities that we have. But see, it won't happen unless we create the systems. Unless we create the systems that allow people to get to know each other as individuals. And for giving people the opportunities to be and share themselves. I mean, let's face it, we're living in a very precarious point right now. We made big changes during the pandemic and big promises during the social unrest. But will those changes and promises come to fruition? Will they be sustainable? Well, it all depends based upon what you do from this moment forward. So let's unleash each other. Let's unleash each other. Our future demands it, and our next generation expects it. Thank you very much, guys.
Glenn, I can't thank you enough. I've had the privilege of hearing you speak before, and every time I hear you, it'll be a couple days and I'll be thinking, yep, and just remembering what you've said. So I'm so glad you're able to come do that and talk about this on our campus.
Of course.
A lot of provocative comments designed to get a discussion going on. So what I'd love to do is see if we have any questions from the audience, and then what we'll do is we'll have a panel after that. So we have 2 microphones set up. If anyone has a question, feel free to go up and hit the microphones, or if you feel like your lungs are in good shape, you can do it without the microphone.
Come on, ask the OP something, please. Yes.
You talked about the gentleman that works for you from Brazil, the chief of marketing, whatever, and you said you made a comment, said he likes working in multiple places.
Yeah.
So that got me thinking, obviously with the advent of COVID, a lot of people are working remotely now.
Yeah, can someone get him a mic?
They want to work. They want to work remotely.
Yeah.
Where I work, I'll just say it like this: there's a concept that working remotely is something that actually could stifle innovation and knowledge transfer. If you don't have, people one-on-one in person, is different than people. You're losing something if you have somebody remotely. So I was just curious to hear your opinion on that. Obviously, there's trade-offs there, but I was just curious what you thought about that.
It all depends on the individual. I mean, for some, it's stifling them, no question. I'm not going to kid you. Even sometimes I feel it stifles me. But there are people that operate better alone and get their social fix outside of work. So my point is that it's a very complex situation, but until we understand who our people even are, can we begin to create the right strategies? And what do I mean by that? You know, we can send out an opinion survey, what matters to you, but do we really know what's going on in that individual's life at that moment in time? I mean, do we really? I mean, I can tell you that I've been in meetings before where I've said, hey, I bet you there's someone on your team that has had healthcare issues and maybe found themselves sleeping in their cars because they can't afford it. Oh, come on, you're silly. Chief People Officer walked up to the CEO and said, well, that's true, we did. What's my point? Why doesn't that person know that, number one? But number two is, why do we know our people well enough to avoid them from having to live in a car? See, what I'm getting at is that we need to know people and what's going on in their lives so that we can begin to evaluate what the best work environment is for them. What we've done, which I respect, is create options, but do we have enough of them? And my point is that until we really know what's going on in people's lives, we can't create the right strategies for a hybrid environment. And how what would I recommend? Have your organization ask those questions. Who will let them be? What do we let them do? How do we see them? Et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully that gives you some perspective. Yes?
I have a question. All of that takes a ton of time. How do you do that?
Ton of time to do what?
Find out individually about
Oh, I
every
got
person.
news for you. Let me just throw this out right now. More than ever, we must seek discomfort. All this stuff is hard. All of it is. Why? Because it's taking us, we have to now think about others more than we have to think about ourselves as a leader. And by the way, it's always been that way. But it requires us to do and spend more time understanding who our people really are. I mean, I can't tell you that this is this is not an easy fix, but standardization wants easy fixes. This is not one that has an easy fix. And this is the part that I believe, actually, if we've given people the reason to step out, this is one of the things that are going to allow people to step in, because they want to work in an environment that makes them not only feel safe, but makes them feel that they won't be judged. And one thing that we learned throughout this pandemic is what? We all have problems. You know, my father, I mentioned my dad before. When I was born, my dad was 50, so I grew up in a home of a lot of wisdom. But he always said to me, son, just remember, everyone's got problems. So be empathetic. Now that's a big word, by the way, right? That's almost becoming commoditized. But my point is that this isn't a quick fix, Nancy. It takes time. And if we're going to take time to do specialized trainings, if we're going to take time to meet certain compliance efforts, then we need to make time for the very people that we're trying to be compliant for. And that's the individual. There's no quick way around it. But I'll tell you this, for what it's worth, because I've done this work with some organizations, it's worth doing the time because you'll find people that don't even belong in the organization because they don't really care about the company anymore. But we never really cared whether they liked their job or not. We just cared about the results. So it will do you a favor by going through that process because you'll be able to pull out, by the way, on a mutual understanding that it's time for you to go. I mean, if there's time to do a refresh, do it through the lens of personalization, not a full-blown act of standardization, because you're only going to create incrementalism. And that's the part that we've missed the boat on over the years. We know that just because we're measured to be a little bit better, well, that's made people feel that all they need to do is be a little bit better. Anyway, that's my take on it. Another question.
I have a question.
Hi.
And I'm not in the education business, but I mean, I've been listening to what you've been saying, and I'm thinking about the school system and students and what they've been going through. But I was wondering, like, where would you start this? at that level of education. Like, I think of all these teachers that they have 25 kids in their classroom. I mean, and so individuality is something that is so lost in the classroom. I mean, because there's just not enough time for one person to understand it. But if you were in charge of, let's say, the school system, where would you start with the training to bring this idea to individuality
Sure.
to that level?
I've done this. It starts with administration.
Okay.
By the way, it shouldn't just start in one area. You can start in two areas at the same time. Because here's what's happening. There's the environment, right? We want to deploy processes and procedures that allow us to work more inclusively to meet our goals and objectives. There's the environment, but then there's the individual. And the individual wants to activate their capacity and dignity. So it's not just starting with solving for the environment, which you typically do at the most senior of levels, but it's also important to tackle it from with the teachers, and not just the teachers, but the parents themselves. I mean, the parents play a huge role in this. And what we've learned is that, and again, and I'm talking through the work that I've done with K through 8, is that you're shaping minds at that age. And the parent needs to play a role, much like my dad did. He didn't want me to be like him. He wanted me to be the best me that I can be. That means the parent has a responsibility in knowing and valuing their own kids, not just through the lens of a parent, but as a human being. So that's how I would start, on both sides. Yes? One more question? Yes?
You mentioned that in this state of change that we've gone through the pandemic in the past year or so, that a lot of businesses are in this state of we need to try and change what we're doing in order to create a better environment through individuality. What push would be required to try and keep companies from trying to go back to the way things were prior once enough time has passed, and to just continue with the method that seemed to work beforehand?
Well, good question, and let me throw a dose of reality here. A lot of major corporations, not all, are traded on Wall Street. You know, they're responsible for financial performance. You can't get away from that. And so there's an inclination to want to go back to the way things were because that's how they're being measured. Remember, it's about how you're being incentivized to operate. So we have to go to a whole other level to make sure that we don't go back. And right now, as long as the incentives remain the same, it's tough to sustain any kind of change. However, what I've seen, and this is more on the corporate side, I'll talk about healthcare in a moment, is on the corporate side, they now realize the balance of power has shifted from institution to the individual. No question about it. People are willing to not have a job because they can't handle working at a particular organization because it doesn't align with their belief systems. So they already know that that's a change. You know what the big issue is now? Is that what is the role of the Human Resources Department? Because now they have to play a different role than they've ever had before. In the past, it's been a highly administrative role. And now it needs to create different expectations and different standards based upon what that individual wants. So what is the whole point? Is that change will only be sustainable, in my mind, when we change the systems that measure and incentivize us differently for success. I can share this from Wall Street for a moment. A dear friend of mine, his name is Nick Modi, he works for RBC Capital Markets. He calls this phenomenon the individual revolution. You have, young adults like yourself on Robinhood influencing stock market prices, right? Oops. It's time for panel discussion. But they're influencing stock market prices. You see corporations now where their unions are on strike and making it much more difficult. So we're already seeing that this balance of power shift from institution to individual is happening, and it's very real on the corporate side. On the healthcare side, clearly, we've seen that patient centricity, what matters to the patient. You heard Dr. Cox, so I don't have to repeat what he said. we don't ask them what they need, what matters to them. And my whole point in this is, I know there's government regulations. These things are not easy. But the moral of the story is that we can create the change if we're willing to put in the work and recognize that if we can come up with better solutions like we did in healthcare with telehealth. I mean, seeing your doctor on your phone years ago was thought, unimaginable. But all of a sudden we have a pandemic and that's okay. Why? Because the providers or the payers decided, oh, we'll pay you for that particular visit. So it's about incentives. It's about market share and finances. Yes?
Standardization has had its day, and it accomplished a great deal.
Yes, it did. A great deal.
So this move to unleash individuality will have its day. But there will perhaps be negative ramifications of this unleashing of individuality as well. Can you anticipate what some of those might be?
Sure. Well, I can tell you what they currently are. And I'll share this in the form of a quick story, if I may, and I'll make it quick. So what are the ramifications? Number one is, so I was working with a group of early in career. Okay, so it's a real story for a large Fortune 10 company. And these early in career were 3 to 7 years on the job. What happened? They asked me to do this work about how do you navigate a large corporate environment and have influence in a large corporate environment. And what were they solving for? They asked me to do this work so that they wouldn't lose their top talent. It wasn't even about development. It was about help us hold on to people. What happened? Well, what they ended up doing was telling me how their managers suppress them. And then I told the managers, I bet what I'm about to tell you about the people that you're leading is actually happening to you. The point is that it all goes up the ladder. The early in career felt suppressed by their managers, and their managers were suppressed by their managers, and you go on and on and on. There's a pushback. Why? Not because people don't want to do it, they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to do it. And one might actually say that what I just shared with you could be viewed as a way of how do you measure inclusion? I mean, where's the role of DE&I in all of this? It's all about individuality, isn't it? Shouldn't it be? Shouldn't it be about driving growth? The pushback is this, and we can't blame people for this. The majority of the influencers in large corporations have done it a certain way. And now they're being asked to be put in other people's shoes and be accountable for other people's lives, and they didn't sign up for it. Much like a teacher who has to do hybrid and has to teach online and doesn't know how to do it because they don't know the technologies and they didn't sign up for it. People didn't sign up for this. So there will be pushback. But what do I think is going to happen? I believe that people realize that they have to listen to these individual voices now. Why? Because we all have stock in the future. And if we continue, it's interesting, I'm staying at a hotel here in downtown, and the lady at the front desk said to me, what are you going to speak about? And I told her in like 15 seconds, she says, I'm tired of feeling like I have to be put in a box. People don't want to be put in boxes anymore. So what will happen? This will be the emergence of the reality of this individual revolution that my friend Nick Money has coined. But it will move to doing what? We can't get rid of standards. Standardization, actually, I think is even going to get better in the future. Why? Because it will account for the individual that it never accounted for in the past. And so we're going to actually go through a massive evolution of redefining standards that account for the individual. And that's where we will find balance between standardization and personalization. So remember, we're not trying to create a movement towards all about the individual. This is all about how does this unleashing of individuality help us modernize our standards? Because we need standards. Does that help a little bit?
Okay, what I'm going to do is we're going to move into our panel session. First of all, before we do that, can we please give Glenn a round of applause? And what I'd like to do now, we have 6 panelists that are here. We have 2 from industry, 2 from the university, and 2 from healthcare. And I'm going to introduce them. I've got to get my clicker. Glenn, I've got to do the panel. What did I do wrong? Okay, so on our panel, hold on, we have tech support has just arrived. On our panelists, we have, first let me introduce Megan Lucas. Megan is the CEO. I'm doing these in the wrong order, I'm sorry. We have Megan Lucas, who is CEO and Chief Economic Development Officer with the Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance. Yep. And she is, which is the region's Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Organization. We have Dr. Rusty Smith, who serves as the Dean of the University of Lynchburg's College of Health Sciences and is a professor of physical therapy. We also have Georgia Harrington, who is the Chief Operating Officer for Centra Health System. Prior to joining Centra, Georgia has led hospital operations and facilities in Raleigh, North Carolina, Baltimore, Maryland, and Richmond, Virginia. We also have Rick Grooms, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief People Officer at Centra. Born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina, he has nearly 30 years of healthcare human resource experience. And unbeknownst to Glenn, we have another person who is joining us, and his name is Brian Garish. And he is the president of Banfield Pet Hospitals, which, if you don't know, they have over 1,000 locations and 20,000 employees. He leads the vision and strategic direction of the industry's leading provider of preventative care. He believes that pets, people, and society are all connected, as we all do, and is passionate about ensuring the practice is making a positive impact on the world at large. So Brian is joining us by Zoom, and I will be coming up on the stage as well.
That's outstanding. Where is he?
Well, Brian has been texting me for the past 30 minutes. He's like, what's going on? What's going on?
What a great surprise.
And I said, you're on a roll, so we gotta wait. So hopefully, we've got lots of people back there. Ooh. Is that good? Yep, so he's gonna come up, hopefully. He's gonna be in the middle. And we have one mic. Now, Glenn has a mic, so we're gonna have to share this one. Is he gone? Oh, you took the mic off. He's no mic. We have one? Yeah. Okay. Oh, we got it. Okay, perfect. We have one mic. Is Ryan here?
He's gonna get here.
Thank you. He's good to me. I'm not touching anything else. I'll bring it up. So while we're waiting for Brian to join us, do you have a question for our panelists?
Sure, you're panelist too, though.
Yes, I am. I'm just going to sit here for a minute, though. I'm going to let you.
Sure. So Megan.
Yes, sir.
Economic development in the local community is critical. Where are businesses today here locally, and how are they pivoting to define their futures?
I'm glad you started with an easy question. Thank you. Businesses today, businesses in the Lynchburg region. First of all, thank you very much for that great presentation. I took lots of fun notes, which will get utilized. I appreciate it. Businesses in the Lynchburg region, everything in this region is nuclear to nutrition. We have 2 large sectors. One is manufacturing, the other is higher education.
What was that? I'm sorry.
So in the business sector, let's talk about nuclear to nutrition. Certainly, there's a lot of important standards there. But we have seen a good bit of our companies who are able to go to a hybrid model are embracing the hybrid model. Now, hybrid is a little more difficult when you're producing, nuclear fuel or Pedialyte. Some of that can't be done, obviously, or you go to jail. But for the most part, we're seeing companies that can pivot have pivoted and are embracing the hybrid model. But they are having the questions that we saw earlier about how do you continue to be innovative if your team is working mostly remote or separated from each other. And I think they're finding those ways quite well.
Very, very good, very good.
Glenn, we now have Brian with us.
Brian, what a great surprise. Great to see you, my man.
Oh, you got it. Somehow we have to turn this up. I don't know how to do we, if we, yeah, maybe that's a way of doing it. We're just trying to make sure we can hear him now.
Okay.
Yeah, we still can't hear you. So. Even Mike.
Actually, I have a question for us.
Okay, well, let me just go, let Brian, okay. Let's try this one more time and see if this works. Do you have anything you want to say to Glenn before we start? No! Okay. There we go. That's about as good as we're going to get. On the phone you.
So Rusty, what was your take on the talk, and how do you see the consequences of the dynamics that we're living in health and business?
Okay. I first want to say, boom! I'm not sure what that means, but it's cool. In any case, no, I like the way you talked about, particularly today's society, where putting the context of our COVID process here, that we're wrestling between the two extremes, if you would, of individualization and then also standardization. You know, it's much like a pendulum, if you think about it. And in some ways, this mask represents the tensions therein, right? So that was interesting for me to see that in that light. And then applying it, I wrestled between applying it as an administrator and a clinician. And as I came down on the clinician side, as a physical therapist for 40 years, it's been interesting to watch the changes within healthcare. And so in many ways, what you're discussing and presenting very well, and again, thank you for a great presentation, it relates very similar to what we've been through in terms of healthcare, where we've moved from what's called a medical model to a biopsychosocial model. And the medical model basically was, once I understand your pathology, I know how to treat you. And so everything was very much biological. You know, we refer to you as a knee patient or a breast cancer patient.
Yes.
And we've moved away from that to some degree. We can discuss that to what degree. But we've moved away from that now towards more a biopsychosocial model. And so I think that where we're looking at the individual, and it was sad to hear that story, particularly as a clinician, but we're seeing folks not just simply as having a biological problems, but also in the context of who they are, their psyche, and then also in terms of the environment that they find themselves in. So, and part of that environment is society. And so the biopsychosocial model, I think, addresses it. So it's very similar. And what's interesting in medicine now is that we see folks swing back and forth. You know, so some folks believe in the biopsychosocial model, and others believe in the biopsychosocial model, and you see others that are biopsychosocial.
Yes.
So I think it's very similar to hear your presentation, because it relates very well to that.
Well, it's interesting because I remember when, in preparing for this particular book, I spoke to several healthcare CEOs, and the one thing that they were most concerned about is that standardization has just always been the way in healthcare, and that's what we know. And as we're now getting into genetics and genomics and all these things on the patient delivery side, you know, how do we change our delivery expectations for not just the patient, but for their families? And so if I were to shift this over now to Rick, you know, Rick, it's clear that this discussion sat where you sit at Centra. Where do you see the state of employees right now, and what matters to them, and how has their mindset shifted over the past 2 years?
Well, when we think about standardization and then individualism, if you will, it's as simple as little things like, how do we schedule? When you hire a nurse, it used to always be, well, you're 7A to 7P and every other weekend. Who wants to do that? How are you willing to be flexible as the manager, the hiring manager, around that? As recently as a year ago, we were flexing our staff off, and we were doing that primarily around holidays. People generally are going to probably be off on the holidays, take another extra day or two off, and we have 7 recognized holidays. Well, they're not just Christian holidays that we should be recognizing. And one of our really high-performing leaders who practices Judaism reached out to me and said, Rick, you want us to take off at Christmas? Well, what about Hanukkah? I don't celebrate Christmas. What about, Passover? It's coming up, Can I do something different? And I'm afraid to ask my boss, who's a big boss. This is her talking. Why, yeah, but the policy says X, Y, and Z, but yeah, but the policy says we can't do that. We had to step out and say, well, what are we really trying to accomplish here? Like you said, what problem are we trying to solve? Are we trying to get some hours out and we're wanting people to take their time off during this pandemic? Or are we more interested in being rigid and not be flexible when this person clearly has a desire to want to be here, to support us, to do what we want to do, but can we just do it one other way or a different way, for example?
Very good. Very good. Georgia, so as a chief operating officer, this plays a lot into what you do. How are you seeing environments changing in healthcare? How is Centra approaching the way it works and conducts business during this time?
Well, I'd like to start by just kind of telling my own story of how I've seen differences from my own perspective. As operations leader in a healthcare facility, you're expected to almost be 24/7. I can't tell you how many nights I've spent the night in the hospital because I thought it was going to snow and I wanted to make sure I could get there. We always said if our employees are going to be there, we need to be there. You had to be available all the time. Now, we still have to be available all the time, but when the pandemic started, I was working at University of Maryland Medical Center in Baltimore, and when it hit New York, it came straight down to the Maryland area almost immediately, and we shut down. My husband and I had the good fortune to be able to work from home for almost a month. I would never have thought in a million years as a head of operations in a hospital that I could do that, because there were the expectations.
Yes.
There were the things you were expected to do to grow your career, to move to the next level. There was all these things you're expected to do. But when I think back about that 1 month that my husband and I worked from home, and we didn't miss a beat, we were able to do what we needed to do. It was the best month that I can remember of my career.
It felt free.
It felt really freeing. So now as we move toward what is the norm, what do we go back to? Even for myself, I'm not sure that norm fits anymore, even though I've done it for over 25 years. And so I look at myself and see the differences it's made for me, and I project that to the differences it might make to all the people who work with me within the organization. Now, of course, there are people who have to be there. I mean, you mentioned there, if you fix food for our patients, well, you can't do that from home. So you have to be there. But we can respect some of the differences, like Rick mentioned, that allow people to have some level of flexibility that meets their individual needs. So, this has been an eye-opening experience for me. And I think one of the questions that was asked is, how do we keep from going back? Well, I'm also the mother of a 27-year-old, and if you know anything about that generation, they will force us to change.
Yeah, no doubt.
If we want to have the people to do the jobs and find the people who to do the work that needs to be done, we will have to change because they don't want the old standards. So
Georgia, you inspired me because, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost took an awakening from you and your husband to realize what other people might be thinking and feeling.
Yeah, I would never have thought that was even possible. Yeah.
Incredible, incredible. Well, the gentleman behind you knows a thing or two about personalization. In fact, boom! That's our code. That's our code. So Brian, it's so great to have you. What a pleasant surprise. So, Brian,
And I'm just trying to figure out how we can get him, I may try the microphone, thank you. I may try the microphone again. We're just trying to figure out how to get him so we can hear it, so everyone can hear
yeah, and
it.
he can hear it. Brian, can you hear me? Brian, did you hear me?
No, I'm trying to get you anywhere. I don't know where the mic is on this. So this is, I can hear him perfectly, but, yeah, I can hear you, but I don't think anyone else can. We're trying, we've got every mic here trying to get volume. And I don't know how to do it. Come. Tech support has just arrived. Look at this.
Probably just the actual Zoom output.
Here we go, thank you. I'll give you an A.
We heard it, we all
All the
heard it.
witnesses. You're outside the box now.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so this is still here, but his might be.
Oh, you're so good.
Is this on my Google Meet?
Yeah.
Brian, we're gonna leave you for a second.
Oh, no.
Just leave it.
In the past, we would be feeling like, oh, we're doing something wrong. Oh, we weren't prepared. But see, in personalization, it's not about being perfect. It's about, you know what? Just being flexible, chill, we'll get it right, away we go.
Let's see if it's gonna work.
Look at Nancy though.
Very excited.
Talk to me, Brian.
Hello?
Rock star! Thank you so much.
And he gets an A.
Exactly.
Not just in this class, but all of them.
Y'all, good night. So, Brian, I just want to say that, boom! That's our that's our code. So, Brian, so a little bit about Brian. So, Brian, you're looking at what I believe is what the future CEO, how a future CEO is supposed to think. Brian is not just the president of Banfield Pet Hospital, but he's someone that understands the importance of finding balance between standardization and personalization. And he's done a really great job of operationalizing that at Banfield. So, Brian, can you share with the group a little bit of your story and your perspectives around the subject?
Yeah, so first, thanks, Glenn, and surprise, I was honored to have the opportunity to join today, so congratulations on the new book.
Thank you.
And as always, you have my support and always rooting you on and continue to make an impact. So here's what I'll share. My journey to Banfield has been an interesting journey, and it's been non-traditional. And it started early in my life when I was 16 years old, working at Walgreens drugstore. I was stocking shelves, sweeping floors, mopping bathrooms, cashiering, loading trucks, using signs outside of them. Whatever they asked me to do, I did. And I got this job because I wanted that financial independence. And I was tired of my parents always saying no, that I didn't have money to go to the movies or go out to eat with my friends or whatever. And what I thought was the attempt for financial independence and personal independence really changed my life. I had no idea that it was going to change my life. And why I stuck here is because I learned 3 powerful lessons when I was 16, 17, 18, and continue to learn to this day. But who I am as a leader was shaped by these early experiences. Working on the front lines, I knew what it felt to be like when I was part of an inclusive culture. And I also remember what it felt like when I was excluded. My voice didn't matter, our store's voice didn't matter, and when decisions were made by the organization or the store manager without us being part of it. And you would see people being engaged or being disengaged based on that experience. And what started off as a part-time job quickly turned into a full-time job because I was 18 years old, I was going to college, I ended up dropping out of college initially. I just wasn't ready for college. And then I quickly turned into an hourly associate, essentially living paycheck to paycheck, living at home with my mom. But I was scared because I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I then had someone take me under their wing and mentor me and develop me. And giving me the opportunity, he saw the potential in me, allowed me to work my way up, become an assistant manager, became a store manager. And the power of that people development and mentorship meant so much to me and continues to this day and how I want to give back. But I want to give a way to understand all of our people that are working on the front line, because when it went from a part-time job to a career, when my voice was heard, how that made me feel or how it made our floor feel, when decisions were made on our behalf. And it's easy to say you have to standardize something that's nationwide, 1,000, 3,000, 5,000 stores from Walgreens. It's easy to say that cop-out, and that's the rhetoric that companies continue to give when they make decisions based on only the bottom line. And that becomes very, very problematic. Well, then I started to experience an amazing culture, why I wanted to start and grow my career at Walgreens. Then once I started experiencing a culture that wasn't productive, you would see people stuck. They were stuck in the standardized trap. They were stuck in this rut of what was happening to them, and they became powerless. So I went back to school, I was working full-time as a store manager, went back to school and finished my degree, and gaining that independence gave me that confidence. And that perspective of starting on the front lines allowed me to then say, what's good about standardizing something around processes to help people, but how do you truly personalize the experience for the associate or the employee? And the only way you can do that is by talking with people. And that's what I refer to as that conversation at scale. When I look at my path now leading Banfield Pet Hospital, we're a chain of veterinary hospitals across the U.S. We have over 1,000 locations, 20,000 associates that work at Banfield, and we're all centered on this love for pets. And the role that the pet has played in our lives has been unbelievable, specifically during this pandemic. But that's not what's inspiring to me. What's inspiring is we have 20,000 associates who want to make a better world for pets. But my purpose in this world is to make a better world for people. And the only way I can do that is by having leaders that are focused on standardizing approaches that says, how do we listen at scale? How do we understand what people are experiencing? So we can make sure that our people strategy is the business strategy. And when you have a people strategy that becomes your business strategy, you are working with and for your people. And you can then have the opportunity to see people, understand who they are, what makes them tick, and it allows people to become part of the culture. But more specifically, it allows the individual to be seen, to be validated, to be heard, and to bring their authentic self to work. And when you can do that, you create great dialogue, you create a shared vision, a shared mission, shared value that are all in service of making a better world for people. And in our case, we can make a better world for pets. So Glenn, thank you for the opportunity to quickly share that story. And if I took it's a little too long, but just wanted to anchor in my why and that perspective of where I came from is the opportunity for me to make sure that we can deliver the best top and bottom line. But only when you deliver it with people through that shared experience and shared vision, then it becomes very, very powerful. And it becomes a differentiator of the corporate rhetoric that we just often hear too often.
Fantastic, Brian. Thank you. So, Rick, how do you respond to that as a Chief People Officer at Centra?
I might want to come work for you. I don't know. I love Centra, but I love your language. I'm hearing that too. We have a new CEO, and we're symbiotic. We're right there. What I hear you saying is relationships drive results. That's my personal mantra. And people will do a lot more for you if you have a relationship with them and you know who they are as an individual, what excites them, what hurts them, what makes them tick, what motivates them, all of those things. That's both personal and professional, I believe. And in the absence of a relationship, you're not going to achieve the results that you want. So if you're a parent or you have a significant other or you supervise, it's important to know who the person is as an individual. I start every one of my one-on-one meetings with my teammates that I supervise by just let's take a couple minutes and tell me what you've been up to. How are your children, or you're working on that, or you got a new puppy, or whatever it might be. And then I also start, when I'm brand new to them, tell me where you want to go. Tell me what you want to be. Is this the penultimate job and you're happy and you want to do that? Or do you want to get your education furthered, or you want to get another job, or do you want to be somewhere else? How can we help you get there? We've started to develop a new philosophy at Centra under our new CEO, Amy Carrier, that train here, stay here, advance here. And so it's part of our role, and I heard some of those comments as well, to help people career map. I'm this, and how do I become that? Maybe I want to be the next CEO, or I want to be the next HR boy or girl, or I want to leave HR and I want to get into IT. Well, how do we help you get there? What are the steps? What can Centra do for you? Et cetera, et cetera. But bottom line for me, what I heard is relationships drive results, and when leaders have relationships with the folks that they're leading, they're going to be able to move the dial in a lot more ways and a lot quicker than in the absence of those relationships.
Very good, Rick, thank you. So Nancy, we got to bring you into the conversation. You're on the other side.
Oh, yes.
So Nancy, how do we do this in higher ed? Why is it so difficult, and what's the opportunity?
Well, it's what I see, and Megan and I were just quietly whispering when you were talking and saying, this is one of those opportunities where an institution our size can outperform larger institutions that have more resources, have bigger revenues, bigger pools of money to play with, because we get to know our students really well. And I tell a story about my eldest son who went to Syracuse. They've only got 6,000 students there. It's not a place that has 20,000 students. When he went his freshman year, he closed out the intro to psychology class because he was the 500th student to get into that class. Literally, there was 499. He presses a button, bing, class is full at 500 students. There is no way a professor gets to know a student in that environment. Our classes here are capped at 25. I know the students. I can make jokes with students because I know all the students. I know some of their dreams. I know some of their hopes. I don't know all of them. I teach one class a semester, but our professors do. They all know them. When a student comes in and is having a bad day, we can get in contact with the student and say, are you okay? Are you okay as a human being? And I had a student who had a really rough time when she first got here, and she actually withdrew. And I kept in touch with her during that time, and I didn't care about her grades. I want to know she was okay as a human being. She's back doing great, and really, really loving her experience. That's one of the things we can do here because of our size that say, you can't do it at James Madison just because the size is so much bigger. And I'm not picking on James Madison. It's a fabulous school. They've got incredible resources and facilities. But it's one of those things that we actually, I think, have an advantage to personalize because what we provide is a relationship and a mentoring opportunity that a lot of schools simply can't offer because they are too big.
One of the things I wanted to point out, and I'll ask someone to jump in, is when you think about these issues, whether you're in corporate, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in higher education, it's all the same thing. Trying to better serve a much more informed and knowledgeable individual. Oops, what? Okay. So how do we best serve a more informed and knowledgeable individual, especially someone that wants to pursue a career in healthcare?
Again, it starts with the individual. Actually, what I'm thinking about a lot is, in response to your question, is that the students, sometimes as dean, I always joke with the parents, they say, oh, my child's in your program. I'm like, well, if I don't teach them, you don't want me to know their name, because if I know their name, they're in trouble, right? And sometimes when I have these troubled students come up and they identify, oh, I wanted to be a physical therapist, but I'm just not getting the grades I need or whatever. I dig deep into that. So, well, why did you want to do physical therapy? Get to know what is it. And so, well, I want to be able to help people. Okay, well, you could do almost anything to be helping people. Let's look at that. And so I think the answer simply is to get to know that individual and then provide them for all kinds of opportunities that are consistent with their skills and their interests.
Why haven't we done this before? Why haven't we? Anybody have any opinions on that? Why haven't we done this before? Georgia, I know you've got an opinion.
Well, I think it's because
I think it's because again, the path is usually already determined. If you want to be X, you got to do this. If you want to be that, you got to do this. And you worry about being frowned upon if you don't take those steps, or if you don't take those steps, you won't meet your goals or do the things that you want to do in life. But I think, I do think that all of that is really shifting and changing. And I also believe, when I think back to early in my career, nobody really, well, I won't say nobody, but it wasn't the norm to really get to know people. It was just to get what you needed out of the person.
Just say what it is.
And so, things have changed, and definitely for the better. I agree with Rick about how we talk with our leaders, the people who report to us. And I'll add one thing. He talked about how he starts a meeting. I end a meeting by saying, am I giving you everything you need? Am I communicating with you and sharing what you need to know? Is there anything you need from me? And I always tell my leaders that it is my role to support them and to encourage them. It's not my role to judge them. It's not my role to dictate how they get the outcome, as long as they get the outcome, of course, within legal and all that kind of boundaries.
So I have a tough question for you then. Knowing that your leaders are suppressed, what do you do when you go back to work tomorrow?
Well, I don't think my leaders are suppressed.
Sorry, we're all suppressed.
Well,
No, really. I mean, do we really know if they're thrilled about work? Do we really know? And this isn't just about you. This is in general. It's like we have to stop suppressing the truth that our leaders are underwhelmed, and they're underwhelming because they're not delivering what their individuals would expect from them. So how do we at least start confronting that, even though you think that your leaders aren't that way? How do you recommend that we start having that discussion?
I make sure that when I am talking with my leaders and meeting with them, they know it's a safe space. So an example, yesterday I had a regular meeting scheduled with one of my leaders, and she was having a rough day. And she, I didn't worry about any agenda that I had or anything. I just let her say, I just let her put it all out there and tell me about what frustrations she might be having, what obstacles she may be experiencing. She wasn't talking to me expecting me to answer and have a plan to how to tackle each and every one of those things. She just wanted me to listen. And so that's what I did. I listened, and then I told her at the end, how much I appreciated her and thanked her for trusting me enough to be willing to talk and share with me.
So it comes so easily for you. What would you say to a leader where it's not so simple? Because what you did is, I believe you. Like, you're very genuine. But not everybody's like you.
Well, trust me, I know that.
So how do you help a leader that has trouble doing what comes so easily?
Well, the first start is by example. We have to lead by example. So that's the first step, but of course that's never enough. Right, and so, we talk about incentivizing, so thanking people and congratulating people when they do focus on the relationship, and whether it's with a colleague, another leader, a patient, or whomever it may be, thanking them and knowing that that's appreciated. But also, I guess,
I know this is a tough.
Yeah, it is kind of a tough one, but I think it's really just keep doing those things and don't let those who don't stop you from doing what you do.
Yeah, done. That's great. Well, see, this goes back, real quick, Megan, before we shift to you. This goes back that this is why things are so exhausting right now, because we just want to stop because we don't see the results, but you got to keep going. You can't stop. Go ahead.
Well, I have a couple things to say. First of all, when Nancy and I were whispering, the young lady over here asked a question about standardization becoming versus individualization, how the pendulum's going to swing and how do you manage that. in higher ed. And one of the things that I leaned over and said to Nancy, I think where higher ed has missed out or has jumped the valley is in critical thinking. I find that higher education has stopped teaching critical thinking the way it used to be taught, or it isn't as important to teach critical thinking and philosophy and how to really apply logic. So I think we need more of that. And that's where University of Lynchburg, their size, the classroom size, and their amazing deans make it happen. So I think that's a real gap that we're seeing. And two, when we talk about today's workforce, in the Lynchburg market, we focus on STEM and we focus on the trades. Yes. Well, where in the trades you still have to teach people to be able to be critical thinkers. So when you're thinking about, you all are educating individuals who are going to be addressing problems that we don't even know what they are today on technology that hasn't been invented yet. How do you prepare them? You prepare them by teaching them critical thinking skills, and that's the gap. That's the first thing I wanted to say. But Georgia's spot on to answering your question is we model the way. I have always found that when we're trying to engage people who maybe aren't, first of all, I believe that flexibility is the key to air power. That's the Air Force side of me. And that's the Air Force model. Flexibility is the key to not just air power, but to really being, I think, a good leader. But modeling the way is how we train our peers or our teammates on how to be empathetic and how to connect with each other. Now, not everybody's good at that. Like Georgia and I know, like all of us know, we're not all good. I have found in my profession, peer groups make the difference. Certainly not all Chamber of Commerce CEOs or economic developers have that ability to connect, but we do have peer groups where we learn from each other. So I think modeling the way is really a great characteristic. I've had role models, people who I model myself after, and I think there might be one or two who might role model themselves after me, and I try and always believe that. But modeling the way is really a great strategy moving forward, because that's how people are going to learn. And then I think communicating with care is really important. Being congenial and authentic is really important as well.
So Brian, why don't you share with us, you can hand him the mic too if you want.
By the way, I love animals, so I'll come work for you any day.
And Brian, what was your major in college?
Philosophy.
Boom.
Critical thinking, right there, logic and critical thinking.
So Brian, tell us a little bit about what you and your team have done at Banfield around the topic of health and wellness, because something that we didn't have time to discuss today is little kittens. One of the topics that we did, so cute. So one of the topics that we didn't discuss was, the issues of mental health, right? And how they're much more prevalent now. And if we're going to solve that problem, then we're going to have to unleash individuality to a whole other level. But I share this because I know that Brian and his team at Banfield have done a lot of work in providing an environment and tools and resources to really help their associates with not just mental health, but overall wellness. Brian, can you talk a little bit about how you've done that and what the results have been to date?
Sure. So kind of building off what I shared from earlier, when I had the opportunity to take over Banfield in 2017, we developed a strategy, and our strategy was focused on the three distinct parts of our business, which was the associates, we call them employees associates. So what I wanted to define the associate experience of the future. And then of course we deal with pets, so what's the pet experience of the future? And then clients that provide the care, we need to make sure that we connect with our clients in ways in which they connect to understand how the services that we're providing makes the pet healthy. All of that was rooted around societal well-being, and under us at the intersection of pet health and societal well-being. So it was really rooted around what are the big issues in society, how do those issues impact our people, and then how can we make sure that we're a beacon for how a company ought to behave around putting people first and on societal issues. When we do that, you're putting your people strategy first, which then ultimately delivers your business strategy. So I was very clear, culture was my top priority, always has been, always will be. And culture comes to life, we are very declarative and unapologetic through two ways. Our equity, inclusion, and diversity journey, and our associate health and well-being journey. So we can have the greatest quality of care, we can have the best subscription type model where our clients love us, it doesn't matter. If we don't have people providing the services, it doesn't matter. If we do not have people that are building relationships with the clients around this journey of care, it doesn't matter. We know that healthcare providers are so incredibly important. I trust my doctor, and I know my doctor's name, and I get to know my doctor as a person, and I get to build a relationship, which then becomes even more influential. So the point is, we have to take care of our people, because everything else doesn't matter if we don't make sure we take care of our people. So our social health and well-being journey that we created was really centered on 5 domains of health and well-being. Healthy body, healthy mind, healthy finances, healthy career, and healthy community. Those 5 dimensions, we were very clear that every decision we have to make has to impact one or multiple of those dimensions. And we have to then engage our associates to make sure that they're understanding we have tools and resources around these dimensions. And then we also tie these dimensions back to societal issues. So as an example, like you mentioned, Glenn, like whether it's education, mental health, or empowering women, these are all 3 topics that are incredibly important in society. They all impact our associates and impact our industry. And it's one thing to know something that's a problem, another thing is the responsibility to do something about it. So when I think about mental health, 1 in 6 veterinarians contemplate suicide at some point in their career. 1 in 10 have a mental health issue. Mental health has been a huge topic, and there's so many millions of Americans facing, specifically during this pandemic. So it's one thing to know about the problem, another thing is what are we going to do about it? And so that's when we created a program called Ask, Assess, Support, Know, where we closed all of our hospitals for 3 hours and had taken nearly 20,000 associates through training to destigmatize suicide and mental health issues. And then we had taken this, not only screened our associates, and then gave this training free to the industry, because it's not our responsibility just to make Banfield better. We have the responsibility to truly be a beacon for how a company ought to behave in society and make the industry better. So whether it's things like that around mental health, whether it's empowering women around flexible schedules, making sure that our leadership team is diverse and representative of our workforce is incredibly important, because the veterinary industry is 80% female. And I didn't understand when I joined Banfield that almost 70% of our leaders were male. How could that be possible when you have 80% of your workforce female? Fast forward 5 years, we now have a proper balance that is very representative of our organization. Why? Because we have a bias towards talent, and we prioritize our people, we prioritize succession planning, we prioritize this health and well-being journey to give our people tools and resources, and asking those questions about the conversation, what's working, what's not working, and where do you want to go, and how can we help you get there? And by spending millions of dollars on these types of benefits, it put our people first. And at the end of the day, it's about outcomes. It's about outcomes around our turnover, the lowest it's ever been in the history of the organization. And as a result, you build better intact teams, and our results have led the industry, whether it's top and bottom line. So whether you're people first or bottom line first, it all comes together when we actually prioritize your people strategy.
That's excellent, Brian. That's excellent. That's excellent. So I want to be mindful of time. How much more time do we have now, Nancy?
You know, I was thinking 7 minutes and 8 o'clock close, but, you know.
Okay. Well, I want to ask my friend Rusty over here. Rusty, how do we talked earlier about how even though healthcare has made a claim to be patient-centered, that it really hasn't been truly patient-centered. And again, it's not just about healthcare. We could say the same thing about education, that we're not truly student-centered. Or, you know, I'm so glad that Brian is joining us, because he is one example of probably 0.1% that can say that they really run a people-centered operation. What are the major hurdles you see in teaching this next generation about how the industry can move to become truly patient-centered? What are your thoughts around that?
Great question. You say that to buy time.
Well, I think that's the question.
Well, it is the question, and it's a question we've thought about, and clearly if I had the great answer, we would be way ahead. That being said, several factors come to mind. One would be, again, going back to your discussion earlier about being, what are the incentives? I mean, that's a key part of that. And related to that is, from a cultural standpoint, for example, is the cost of tuition. And students are leaving here, particularly in the health areas, and they, with significant debt, it's amazing. I mean, most of them have a mortgage, essentially, when they leave to go care for folks. And now they're going into fields where the salaries have plateaued, if not dropped. So that's a real challenge. And so I think that's one area we need to think about from a society standpoint, is how we incentivize, and then how we address the tuition part. That's one of the challenges for us in higher education. I think on a personal note, I think that, again, being patient-centric is really the call that we're discussing here, is to remind, encourage, demonstrate, facilitate that the caregiver does indeed understand the importance of the individual, and that we're able to promote that. And that part of that is critical thinking, particularly in terms of relationship. And so, as I remind my students, we're privileged to work with individuals in deep need, and sometimes at their worst. Whether it be mental health, physical health, whatever it might be. And so that we then need to be ready for that. And the word that popped in my mind when you were talking, and it relates to this discussion here, is reflection. I think that, and if we go back to the answer that you gave earlier as well, that was spot on. And if we just pause and reflect and identify what just took place, and compare that to what we would like to be in terms of relationship and the values that you've outlined here this evening, I think to me that would make the change on the personal level. So I went from society to the individual. I think those are some of the major factors that I can think of.
Excellent. And I think one thing, I mean,
I think we all know the role that critical care nurses played throughout the pandemic, and now being a nurse, it's what a career. You talk about pay increases in demand for them. But I think what they also taught us is the realities of how we can treat people more as individuals. And I know this working with the American Association of Critical Care Nurses and their CEO, that a lot of things have been exposed at the bedside that we never knew of before or never considered before. And so I just only bring this as a point because you're trying to prepare the future of this industry. And that's a tremendous responsibility, especially when you consider that new technologies are being introduced to this industry that don't require us to really go to a hospital anymore. And so I see more and more digital therapeutics out there, more and more digital options. Is that relieving us from trying to create doctors in the future that represent the patients that are being served or not? Remains to be seen. But I'll just ask this one final question of you, Rusty, is what role does higher ed play in really helping shape what the future of healthcare will look like?
One thought that comes up, or several thoughts come up. One that comes to mind is the challenge that all of us, but particularly I think in healthcare, the challenge that we face is information overload. I remember in 2010 when medical knowledge was doubling every 5 years. And so I used to tell the students at graduation, next year I'm going to ask you if your rate of knowledge has grown 20%. Oh, yeah. And I'll ask you, why are you just staying level? Now, most recently, I was seeing that medical knowledge doubles every 78 days. wow, how do you prepare somebody for that, right? And so I think there's a switch now, and it relates again to critical thinking, is how do you manage that information, applying it to that particular individual? I mean, that's critical thinking. And so that comes to mind. And the other thing that comes to my mind is looking ahead into your crystal ball and thinking, which way is this going to go? But again, if you break it down into the basic components, we're talking about caring for someone, being competent, being creative. That's really, so those three variables to me don't change. And so how do we prepare folks to do that? That to me is the focus.
Excellent. Megan, there's some follow-up?
I do. I think that your question is great, asking how is higher education going to change the way we do healthcare? But the reverse is, or is it healthcare changing education? Because I'm going to say this, and I mostly believe it, in that oftentimes the private sector is moving more quickly than higher education is allowed. And so I think the way we change healthcare is that healthcare, the private sector, and the education are together to really change the platform and the theater that is healthcare today. I think they have to do it together because one is in the trenches executing more rapidly, while education, they both equally have a lot of red tape. So I don't know which one, between healthcare and education, they're both trying to meet some standards that are put onto them. But I think that's a real interesting discussion. The opportunity is, what are you doing with Centra to change healthcare education moving forward? Sorry about that.
No, in fact, you just, we didn't realize that you just did, is you gave us an example of this convergence, right? Healthcare, corporate, higher education. I mean, let's not forget that corporate America today looks a lot different. The cultural demographic shift is in full swing. When large cultural segments of the population reach numbers sufficient enough to have a significant effect on what we do and how we act. Black and brown populations are most susceptible to chronic disease states. Are we prepared for that? No, not even close. In 2019, I made a declarative statement that we're all in the business of healthcare. People didn't believe it. They thought healthcare is what happens in hospitals. And now we have workforces, and that's why I asked Brian to talk about what Banfield's doing. I mean, that's an example that other organizations should follow. In other words, you don't have a true people-centered strategy until wellness is part of that equation. Because today, I'll give you an example of just where standards get in the way. I spoke to this gentleman about 3 months ago. He's been in benefits management for over 30 years. And we had the question, how do you get an organization to invest in health and well-being, individual by individual? They go, oh, this all starts with someone in the C-suite. Someone in the C-suite has cancer, has heart disease, that's when we make the decision. And I said, wait a second. I said, who told you that? Well, that's the way it's always been in benefits management. That's when we finally get the budget. I said, wait a second. What about the 50,000 people that work for that organization that are more culturally diverse and haven't had good access to health care in their lives? And it takes someone in the C-suite to have the problem? You're looking at it in the wrong way. And he looked at me and he was a bit offended. I go, I'm not trying to offend you, just that the marketplace is past your thinking by. And I'm only sharing that to push you because we need you to evolve as a leader, because if you're sending the wrong message, then how are we going to find real meaningful change? And this is the problem with standardization. It gets us so locked into a specific way of thinking that we're oftentimes counseling and advising people to do the wrong things. And that's where we find ourselves today, I believe, is that oftentimes we're not solving for the right opportunities. We're solving for the ones that are comfortable for us based upon what our experience tells us, not what the future and the people are telling us, because instead of going one by one and finding out, and I know there's HIPAA regulations, I get all that, but the employee will tell you eventually, look, my parents are spending a fortune on XYZ. I'm seeing my grandparents die because of XYZ. Well, do we ever think that all those healthcare problems that exist from employees have an effect on their performance? I mean, we don't think that way. Why? Because we're not
wired to think about the individual first. So I love what you said. It requires higher education and healthcare, but it also requires corporations, because healthcare, I believe, will be the single fastest growing cost center in a corporation. They don't know what's about to hit them. Just for perspective. Anybody want to react or respond to this? Rick, what do you think from an HR perspective? Here, let me.
Health insurance already is our #1 expense besides payroll.
We're missing out on good content. Keep saying it again. That's good.
I can tell you that it's true for us and probably true for every employer. The healthcare expense or the health plan is the most expensive benefit we have. It's the most expensive expense we have beyond our payroll. I wanted to add to what Rusty said. From the employer perspective in healthcare, this is a generalization, so it's a little bit of a danger zone when I make this comment. What I find that new employees who are clinical into healthcare oftentimes are missing, they come with good, competent skills and sometimes are farther ahead than most people who've been in the job for a while because they know what they see, but they haven't learned the newest. But what we often see is they haven't been a patient before. And so they know what to do. They know how to do their whatever. If they're an x-ray tech or a pharmacist, they know what the meds do. Or if they're in the lab, they know how to run the test, or if they're a nurse. But it's often, not always, but oftentimes they've not been a patient before. And so they don't know what it's like for that patient to be there looking at the tiles. That's all they see. I can tell you how many tiles is up here, how many holes is in each tile, but they don't know what that's been like. And Megan talked about the critical thinking skills. What beyond the medical stuff that's happening with this patient is happening with this patient?
That's right.
That's what we really have to address in addition to the clinical things that have to happen, because we can address those and work with them and deal with whatever their condition is, but it's all the rest of the stuff that's going on. You know, you said what matters to you. So it used to be what's the matter with you when you come in and present for healthcare. Now it has to be what matters to you most. And at our organization, we've developed what we call our just cause, which is partnering with you to live your best life. We don't have a mission statement. We don't have a vision statement presently. This is what everybody's why is. And that you matters for the patient, for the community, or for the employee. And so that the matters to you most part is maybe I'm not going to lose 25 pounds, but I do want to be here in September to walk my daughter down the aisle. Or I'm not going to stop smoking. I don't do those things, but maybe I smoke and I can't cut out a pack a day, but maybe I can get down to 3. I still got to have one after every meal instead of being chastised for that, and that will allow me to be here 2 or 3 more years instead of being gone tomorrow. But what's important to those patients and what makes sense to them to get to whatever their optimal state is, and not, well, if you can't do this, then you're probably not we can't help you anymore.
So how do you think about creating optimal state for your employees? Shouldn't it be one of the same?
Yeah, it is. Finding out what's important to them. You have to ask them. You have to be in relationship to get the gospel, really.
So Rick, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
Yeah, go for it.
Think about what yes, I've set this up now. We're all talking about the patient, the employee, the student. Why can't we see them as one individual? We just keep putting people in categories and doing double the work, or if not triple the work, to solve for the exact same thing.
You've got a great point there.
No, I'm just trying to tell you about how we all fell into the standardization trap.
We did.
Unknowingly. And I say that respectfully, Rick.
No.
The whole point is that I think that someone like you, Rick, could align themselves with, forget about the title, but the person, you're in charge of people, they're in charge of patients. Why aren't you guys partnering to create a better overall experience for both of them? And why can't we learn from what the patient needs to think about what our employees need, and vice versa? I mean, pioneer that. Start that tomorrow. The industry is so slow in even thinking or in executing something like that. You guys are a smaller, nimble operation. Go for it, because it's not about waiting for the big guy to figure it out. It's actually the opposite. It's about how can the smaller institutions that have the flexibility and mobility and the nimbleness help educate even the larger institutions. And this goes back to what you said, Nancy. You guys are a smaller institution. You should be practicing personalization every day. Everyone should want to come to this school. And then all of a sudden when the enrollment numbers hit the roof, you don't say, oh my gosh, let's open up more enrollment. No, you say, let's stay where we're at and be the best at serving that individual. And then start creating new techniques that you can then now share and partner with other educational institutions, whether they're higher ed or K through 12. You see the point? You guys have the ability to create the solutions, but we end up putting so much focus on things that don't focus on what we should be solving for, is a more informed and knowledgeable individual. And I keep repeating that because the things that Brian is doing, they work. You know why? Because he can share the correct numbers, Brian. I know these things evolve, but in fact, I'll just ask Brian. Brian, can you share with the group the percentage of your associates that are millennial and Gen Z?
76%.
76%. And why are they, and why do you think that they appreciate the work you're doing more than if it were, let's just say, an older, mature, overly standardized individual?
Well, I mean, there's probably lots of things, but one of the things I'll say, Glenn, is we got rid of the intranet. The intranet is a standardized approach that businesses want to use to tell themselves a story about how we're going to communicate authentically with our people, which is a bunch of crap, honestly, because that's a business trying to solve the way in which to communicate. Though I scrapped that, we got rid of it, I use Instagram. Why do I use Instagram? Because 76% of our associates are millennials and Gen Z, and they spend time on social media where they want to spend time. So as a leader, I have a choice. Do I want to be part of the conversation? And I can go to where the conversation's happening. The fact is, the busiest thing in any organization is the grapevine. Are you part of the conversation or not? So I choose to be part of the conversation and share who I am as a person, share what's happening in my life. Luckily, I have 2 crazy cats that people like to follow. And that type of engagement allows me to engage with our associates. And we'll host something every month that I agree with Brian. When we do that, I'll get over 500 questions from our people. And having that dialogue and exchange is an invitation, not just for me, but every one of our leaders to engage in a way that's authentic to themselves, whether it's LinkedIn, Instagram, wherever, to be part of the conversation. And that perspective of where we all come from, what we're experiencing, gives us the opportunity to connect authentically with our people where they are.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. So, where are we at with the conversation, Nancy? What are you thinking and feeling right now?
You know, we are really lucky because Brian's coming to campus in the fall. So we'll have Brian here in the fall. It's every time I have this discussion, I just go away and I'm like, I need to go think. I've just got to go away and think about this and think, how can we do better? What can we do differently? And we always run the risk in higher ed that we're going to do things incrementally rather than revolutionarily. And there you lose, by being incremental, you can grow incrementally, you can lose incrementally, but the risk of being revolutionary is you're betting the farm. And that is a risk that many, many institutions in higher ed will not do until they're pushed right up against the wall.
Well, haven't we been pushed up against it already?
In COVID pushed higher ed to have to pivot within, a week. We literally had to go online in a week in a fully in-person institution. I think, the only time in my change management career that I've seen organizations profoundly change was when they were really up against the wall. And they had no other choice but to really throw everything up in the air and hope it lands in a way that is constructive.
So what are we waiting for, Nancy?
I think higher ed is really complacent. I think that they are too, as an institution, and not just us. I mean, almost every higher ed institution, unless you are right up against the wall, you'll keep going along the way you are, hoping that it gets better, rather than say we have to do things profoundly differently. And I think it's really hard to do it any other way, because the accreditors, your board of trustees, your alumni, nobody really wants to see you do something so far out of the box that you could fail, or that it may not work as successfully as you want it to. You've got all these stakeholder forces saying, just try this, try that, just try, play at this, play at that. And this idea that you're gonna say, I'm doing something profoundly different, only happens when you are really, really up against it and you're on the verge of closing. Right, or fully funded. Right, right. Now, I'm only mindful, I'm a little mindful of the time, because we could keep doing this all night, which is the really scary thing. And look, the students are like, but.
Maybe they should ask them some questions. Maybe they should ask us some questions.
I would love to hear questions, and then I think we probably should wrap up.
Yeah.
But does anyone?
Yes.
So I think it's more of just asking for your immediate response from the situation we have here at the school. Talking about promoting individuality and promoting, I guess, the student worker.
Can we get the mic on?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. You're going to ask something powerful.
So I'm very involved here on the campus. I'm a student worker, actually a floor below us at the Academic Achievement Center. I work with transfer students. Is it on? Is it on? Are you closer to it? Hello? Hello? Yeah. There we go. Okay, so as I was saying, I work really a floor below us at the Academic Achievement Center. I work with transfer students. And a lot of people on campus work on the campus because they like the campus, they enjoy the environment here. But one of the problems we have is we had a new law come through that raised minimum wage rates in Virginia to, I think it was $11, $11.50. But there was a statement in the law that allowed universities and colleges to keep it at the old $7.25. A lot of this has led to students leaving their on-campus jobs because they feel that while yes, the school wants us here, they're not paying us what other places will pay us. So they're having to find off-campus jobs. I work my on-campus job and an off-campus job to pay my rent because $7.25 doesn't pay the rent. So I guess I'm just asking for initial reaction of ways to try to promote student individuality in that sense. Yes, it's pay and it's not as serious as maybe just the HR side of things, but I do believe pay, especially for us younger people who are trying to make ends meet at this time in our lives, where the pay can help us be more encouraged in our on-campus jobs and help us want to stay on campus more often. So I guess it's just more of a question of your reactions to that. How do you think that's something that can be implemented better in the school? Because it is something that a lot of people I know who work on campus struggle with is, yes, I love my job and I love what I do on my campus, but I have to have a second job where my time gets pulled away from the campus even more so because of the pay.
Who wants to tackle that? I think that goes to you, Nancy.
You got the mic.
I had this conversation with our provost less than a week ago, saying that that we are losing talent to outside jobs because we have students who need to earn money. This is not a charity. They are not charities. We have to be competitive on pay with the outside forces if we are going to have our best students work here. And so she said, yes, I understand. And that's as far as it got. And I'm not saying I think she understands this. I think she really does understand this. And I think she's trying to figure out how on earth we do that within the budget constraints that we have. But it doesn't mean that she doesn't understand that this is an issue. But she's witnessing it. You know, we have a system here where we have past leaders. They are peer teachers that help their fellow students. And we have students that can go out and tutor off campus and earn $15 an hour. And we have peer leaders on campus that earn $7.25 an hour. So they have to work twice as many hours on campus to earn what they're earning off campus. It's rough. We're just, there comes a point where, you've just got to pay what the market demands, or you're going to lose your best people.
And at what cost?
Right.
So we've been on that journey at Centra. When I got here in January 2020, we were paying $9.50 an hour. That was our minimum wage. In 2 weeks, we moved to 15, and we've had 3 incremental steps in between to get there. And it came down to, if I might love being a phlebotomist, but I can make more at Chick-fil-A. Or I love being a nursing assistant, but I can make more working at Target. And how much is that churn and burn worth it to you? That's impacting the patients. It's impacting the people who are working and I don't want to leave. I've got a pension, I've got benefits, I have this and that, but I can forego health insurance if I can get double my pay or a $6 an hour raise. That's $12,000, $13,000 a year more. I can figure that health insurance bit out. I can stay on my parents until I'm 26. So it's how much is it worth to the organization to, A, maybe not have the highest caliber people, not have the motivated people who really want to be here and do the job, and or how often do you have to keep replacing and replacing and replacing, and at what skill level are you replacing them at when you're not paying competitively? No offense. I mean, that's what we are facing ourselves. And 15 isn't going to be enough. It's going to need to be more. I can see it being 20 in 2 to 3 years as our minimum wage.
So then it goes back to, why are we waiting? I mean.
It's above my pay grade?
No, that question is really not related to you.
Okay, I'm going to have,
sorry.
this is an observation, not a question. The reason we care about employees now is because we have to. 15 years ago, we had more employees than we knew what to do with. We could have more coming in. So if we have a surplus of people that want to work for us, we don't have to worry about their mental health or their personal time or anything like that, because if they are happy, they go, we bring somebody else in. Now we're no longer in that position. And talent, organizations have to fight for talent. That's a new position for them. They haven't been in that for a long time. And now all of a sudden, they're trying to figure out how to do that. That's my observation.
Yeah, and I would add to that is I tell this to my team, and I try to remind myself often, the time to tell your spouse that you love them or your significant other is not when their bags are packed and they're walking out the door. You've got to, and I've never had that experience, hope I never will, but it holds true for employees. I can remember as late as 10 years ago, 12 years ago, where a lot of employers had one benefit package, one health plan, one this, one that. You could be single, you could be 50, you could be, whatever you were. It didn't matter. This is the benefits that we offer. This is the pay that we offer. Take it or leave it. So whoever that was, I can't see with the lights. You're exactly right. Now, one size doesn't fit all, like one schedule doesn't fit all. And if you're not willing to be flexible, if you're not willing to understand what it is that the individual needs as well as the rest of the workforce, and that things are evolving and changing, then you're going to be left with what's left, and that may not be sufficient.
And so my closing comments on this, and I'm just going to ask everyone to provide maybe a 3 to 5 word answer to a question that I still don't know what I'm going to ask yet, is why are we waiting? I'm going to ask you to answer that question. We're in the standardization trap right now. Why are we waiting until we can't no more, and then all of a sudden, why can't we get out in front of change before circumstances force their hand? Why can't we do that? Go ahead, Nancy.
People are terrified of change.
Okay, well, but we know that. My point is that, is this going to get worse before it gets better? And all of this, in my mind, boils down to one thing: leadership. And I think in the end, this is why I'm glad that you brought Brian into this discussion, because it's great that you can see that he fought the standard, he fought suppression, he fought it. He didn't go a traditional path. And now he's going to exemplify what leadership really means. You know why? Because he's not afraid of what the consequences are. He knows that he has more control than the institution itself. So if he knows that, why don't all of you? Because you do. There's a price to pay. And the institutions need you more than you think. It's all about people. And that begins with each of you. So I'm just trying to push a little bit, because we don't need to wait for the next crisis. We are in crisis. It will continue to be more uncertain. And fortunately, for everyone on this panel, we can survive it. What are we going to do for them?
Right.
Because we're not solving for ourselves anymore. We're solving for them. And it's our responsibility to get them to see, and I'm so glad that you guys have stuck around and listened to this discussion. It is real. But that also means that you have to step up as well. Ask more questions, push the system. Why not? So nice to see you.
You too, I love meeting you.
Oh, I love meeting you too. Take care.
Bye.
So anyway, I'm trying to just push a little bit because, look, I enjoy conversations like this. They're so crucial, they're so timely. But my biggest concern is that we use conversations as a crutch to say, oh, we talked about it. But what's going to happen? And I want to pose this challenge to all of you. I'd love to come back in the next 30 days in an all-virtual session and ask all of you to present, what did you get out of this night? And what is the one thing that you either thought differently about or acted differently on? Is that a fair request?
Absolutely.
I mean, can I get that commitment, or do we need corporate approval? I'm having fun.
My standards won't allow it.
No, is that fair enough?
Sure,
Oh, no,
absolutely.
seriously, Georgia, how would you feel about that? You good about that?
Yeah.
Okay, and then I have another surprise after we do that. Okay, so Nancy, can you and me put that together?
Absolutely.
Okay, done. So, 3 to 5 words. What are you going to do? What are you going to be thinking about when you wake up in the morning after you've processed this discussion today? Don't tell me this is hard, because then we've got another problem. So, Rusty, you want to start? Rusty's good on the fly.
Well, I appreciate that. So tomorrow morning, when I wake up, what am I going to be thinking?
Yeah, after you've processed this discussion,
Right.
you heard the questions from your students, you've heard this discussion on the panel, what are you going to be thinking about? Like, in other words, go ahead.
What comes to mind is, and I like to keep things simple.
Go.
So express or suppress.
Love it.
And that's what I was going to suggest to you. Don't suppress. Keep expressing.
Love it.
I'm gonna be thinking about the intersection of suppression and tenacity. I'm also gonna be thinking about, we're talking about standardization to individualization, but I want to be thinking too about what the individual responsibilities are to that. Not just on my role as a leader, or my position as a leader to help my team recognize the individualities of my team, but that also comes with responsibility for those teammates.
You bet. Excellent. Thank you, Megan.
You're welcome.
Georgia.
To encourage my leaders, who are the leaders of the future, because the change is not just with me, it has permeated through the whole system. So.
Excellent.
So you made me think of what I should be thinking about when you said, how does the patient and the employee experience fit together, and how can they contribute together versus why are we looking at them separately and independently?
Excellent. Excellent. Nancy.
This is so hard, and I'll tell you why this is so hard, is because this happens every time I see Glenn. I have got thoughts running around all over the place, and I'll sit here for days, literally days, trying to figure out, this is all your fault. How am I going to do things differently? How do I do it? How do I deal with the internal machinations of an organization, but at the same time, knowing that what we have is, what the relationship we have with our students is exceptional. How do we explain that to people that aren't in part of this community? And how do we make our relationship with our students even more exceptional?
Excellent. Excellent. Brian?
Perspective, conversation, and impact. Perspective of where we all came from, our own individual past experiences, and to have the right perspective of those that we're leading requires conversation. You can have a conversation and truly get to know people and understand what they're experiencing, what they want, what they need, what tools and resources can make them more effective, not just in business, not for the work that they do, but for their personal lives as well, because the blurriness has never been blurrier. That conversation gives you perspective of what you're falling for as a leader. It's all in service of making impact.
Excellent, Brian. Thank you. And thank you for the surprise, Brian. It's great to see you, my friend.
Great to see you, Glenn. Thank you so much. Congratulations again on the book, and HOS always.
That's Hall of Fame, just so you know what that is. Well, Nancy, do you want to close this?
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for sticking this out and being with us. I think it's, what I love about Glenn is I always come away thinking, for a period of time, not just like tonight, days and days later, I'll be thinking about this and what he says, and I'll have something happen, and I'll think, how can I do things differently? How can I treat people in a more individualized way as opposed to a standardized way? And when does this system get in the way of the person? And I hope that all of you have had a little bit of that experience. I've only known Glenn for a couple of years, but boy, he has made a huge impact on how I view my role, how I view students, and how I view this institution and our partnerships with the community. Again, with Megan's point, going back into the community, the business community, wrapped up into in my case, College of Business. And I think it's really, this convergence is really important, and the more we can do, the better off we are. So thank you, Glenn. Congratulations. We are the first stop on the book tour. We do have books in the back if you would like to purchase a book. I think we can get Glenn to autograph them for you. Sure. And thank you all for being with us tonight.
Thank you, it's great to meet you. It's wonderful, wonderful.
Everything.
Good job, well done. Nice to meet you. Please, yeah. Well said, Georgia. Nice to see you, nice to meet you. Very good to see you again, good to see you.
Nice to meet you.